I'd like to start the work session for today, Thursday, February 12th. Turn it over to Dr. Whitney, please.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. As you know, this work session has been called to hear the final results of the classification and compensation plan that you all had requested earlier this school year. I'm going to call to the podium our Human Resource Director, Dr. Suzanne Rice, who has worked very closely with Evergreen. Dr. Rice.
Good afternoon. I have with us again Mr. Tom Masters, who's from Evergreen Solutions, and he is going to present to you the final report.
This begins on page 1 of your handout.
Good afternoon, board members, Dr. Whitney, and thank you for having me back. As you know, presenting the draft preliminary findings on January 8th. I'm now back to share with you our final findings now that they've been refined and we worked through all the technicalities. The purpose of this presentation is to review the major changes from the January 8th presentation and the draft results that occurred. We're going to review the final recommendations. So kind of as I did in the draft presentation, I'll go back through each of our recommendations one by one. And then at the very end, I'll just review our progress to date, as well as some of the remaining tasks that are on the table for us to complete. So the major updates since the draft report that was presented on January 8th, we added 3 new recommendations. I'll talk about those a little bit. We added a new phase 4, just based on the compensation philosophy of the division. And we also, I just wanted to share that overall cost didn't fluctuate very much, about a $5,000 reduction in overall costs. So here's a review one by one of our recommendations and kind of what changed with them. As you recall, recommendation 1 was to address support positions that were found to be 20% or more below market. And in that recommendation, we simply removed the buyer classification as that position is being phased out. So originally in our draft recommendations, that was one of the 11 positions that we were recommending for addressing, and now there's only 10. So that reduced the cost, and I believe that that is what contributed to that $5,000 cost differential from our last presentation. For recommendation 2, this was a recommendation to change some of the classification titles, the job titles themselves, to more accurately reflect the roles and responsibilities of those classifications. For one of the classifications, which was the technology technician position, we recommended breaking that out into a logical hierarchy based on employee skill set. So that added cost, because what we were able to do, we had recommended that originally, but when we came back to the table, we said, okay, now that we've got that out and we've identified that as a need, how would employees actually be placed into that hierarchy? So earlier in January, we didn't have that information. We needed to have the conversation around who should go where based on years of experience, credentials, education, that sort of thing. So we were able to identify those employees and slot them. And that added cost, just because several employees, once they were slotted, moved up or down. Recommendation 3 was the recommendation for the new proposed teacher scale, and as you can see, there was no changes there. So we didn't touch that recommendation from the draft report. Recommendation 4 was simply a recommendation. I think it was recommendation 6 previously. I may be wrong on that, but that was the recommendation to address maintenance of the plan. So to go out and conduct a small localized salary survey every year, just to get a feel for which way the market is headed in your peer divisions. A lot of times no changes are made. Sometimes a cost of living is given or a merit increase, or they adjust the entire scale in some way, shape, or form. And so we made that recommendation just so that Suffolk can kind of maintain information on a year-to-year basis on what the other divisions are doing. I did want to mention our recommendation 4. This recommendation to do that annual survey will be very important if a phased-in approach is selected, because as you know, if it's phased in, our recommendations over time, you would want information on how the market moved during that time. Recommendation 5 is a new recommendation, but was included in scope. So what we did is we went out and we surveyed peers to collect information on their contract employee salaries, specifically for the superintendent level salaries. We went back to the RFP and realized we missed that, and it's sometimes hard to make those comparisons with the contract employee salaries. So we went back and we did that analysis. We collected the information from, I believe, 6 peers responded, and that's now Exhibit 4B in our final report, that comparison. Recommendation 6. This was the recommendation originally to address the jobs that fell 10 to 20% below market. And we made a mistake there in the draft report. We did not include the custodian 10-month positions. We only included the custodian 12-month positions. I believe there was about 6 custodian 10 months that should have also been included. So we went back, we made the revision in the chapter, and we also looked at the cost impact and added that into our calculation. For this recommendation, we also separated out coordinator and director level positions. So this recommendation now just addresses support positions that are between 10 and 20% below market and are not coordinator or director level positions. Those have been addressed in a subsequent recommendation. Recommendation 7 also, and I'm sorry I didn't change this, also a recommendation for maintenance of the plan. And this particular recommendation stayed the same. It's a recommendation that Suffolk goes out and conducts a comprehensive compensation study every 3 to 5 years, whether internal or external, however the division wishes to handle that. And that's because going back to that previous recommendation, recommendation 4, which was a small localized salary survey every year, you can't get the big picture doing those from year to year. Over time, you just need to go out and do more of a comprehensive analysis of what's happened in the marketplace with compensation. So that recommendation 7 is just a bigger picture. Recommendation 8, this is a new recommendation. And this was a concern early on about addressing the parity between years of experience and employee placement in the salary schedule. Because of some freezes that have taken place and caps on number of years of experience to be recognized, the correlation between employee years of experience and where they are in the plan is not very high. And we recommend this later on because we feel that the most important piece of all this is to get up to speed with the market first and then look internally at this parity between years of experience and placement within the range. Okay, and recommendation 9, this is a new recommendation. As I mentioned up at recommendation 6, we broke out the coordinator and director level positions into their own recommendation. So recommendation 9 is very much similar to recommendation 6. It addresses the coordinator and director level positions found to be 10 to 20% below market. Also, in this recommendation, we realized that when we originally slotted some of the jobs, the internal equity between some positions and positions that they supervise were off. In other words, we slotted them at the same level. When common sense tells you if someone's supervising a certain position, they should be a step higher. And so we revised our recommendation for the Director of Elementary Leadership so that internal equity between that particular position and principal positions remained the same as it was before the study. Okay, so that was kind of an overview of the changes. Now I'm going to go through the 9 total recommendations one at a time and talk about them a little bit more and their cost impacts. The preliminary implementation costs were also calculated for these, and 5 have associated costs. And just as our draft recommendations did, or were designed to do, these recommendations still address bringing Suffolk Public Schools to market. And the last bullet there, we still would suggest that if possible, Suffolk Public Schools implement all recommendations at once. Again, as this reads, recommendations and market data and the data that we collect has a shelf life. Now, we did embed some recommendations in there for maintenance of the system and to address the data going stale, if you will, over time. So that has been addressed. Okay, new recommendation number 1. This recommendation is to regrade the 10 support positions found to be 20% or more below market. Again, for this one, originally it was 11 positions. We simply removed the buyer position because that particular class is being phased out. And the cost went down a little bit because of that for this recommendation. So total implementation cost now, $59,429. Okay, recommendation 2. This was the title changes recommendation, where we recommended that the titles be changed for several classifications to better reflect their roles and responsibilities. Again, I talked about this a little bit before, but there is now a cost where there wasn't in the draft report. There is now a cost here because we recommended that the division take the technology technician position and break that out into a hierarchy of positions. So technology technician 1, 2, and 3. I believe there was significant turnover in that position. There's also very clear roles and responsibilities, a delineation between the roles and responsibilities of the folks at those levels, as well as the required education, experience, and certifications. So there's ample evidence for us to say, let's break this position out. And then when we finally did sit down and say, okay, which existing employees would fall into those new levels? So they were all at a 1 or at the base level, and now there's going to be some at 2 and some at 3 based on clearly defined years of experience and education level. So that came with a cost. There was a couple employees that moved up, and there was associated cost to do that. Okay, recommendation 3, again, there was no change to this. This was addressing the teacher scale. We left in there exactly as it read before. No changes to the teacher scale, and the cost for this recommendation remained the same. Okay, recommendation 4. This was the maintenance recommendation I talked about reviewing the plan, the compensation and classification plan on an annual basis, and reviewing it in comparison to the market. So the idea here would be for Suffolk Public Schools to go out and just get a good feel, whether it be in July or August, shortly after the new fiscal year, and what those peer school divisions did in terms of adjusting their compensation schedule. A lot of times you'll find that they won't do anything. Sometimes they'll do what Suffolk's doing, and they've conducted a study, and they've decided they want to lead the market by 5%, and that's something you all would want to know about. So there's no cost to doing that. Requires a couple phone calls or some emails generally, and it's just really to probe the market and see which direction it's headed. Okay, recommendation 5. This was the new recommendation to review the superintendent salary, contract position salaries. We can go out to the market and we can conduct an analysis of base salary for contract positions, but a lot of times that doesn't tell the whole story. So in the scope of our work, it was included to go collect data to compare at the high level, just base. But what this recommendation is saying is you probably need to go out and look at some of the idiosyncrasies behind the salaries, the level of experience, education, what those contract positions bring to the table. because when we did just a cursory overview or comparison between peer districts in Suffolk for contract positions, we found that the superintendent's salary was about 20% behind market. Okay, recommendation 6. This recommendation remained pretty much the same with the exception of removing the coordinators and directors and putting them in their own bucket or recommendation. This was to address the 31 classifications that we found were 10 to 20% behind market. And then also the middle school principal and the high school assistant principal, because all the other principal and assistant principal positions were found to be behind market. So if we move them up, it wouldn't make sense from a pay grade internal equity perspective to not move the other two principal positions, assistant principal positions up. And so your cost here was reduced, but it was simply moved to another recommendation, which is recommendation 9 that I'll talk about, with the removal of those coordinators and directors. Okay, recommendation 7, another maintenance recommendation. And this is a recommendation to conduct a comprehensive class and comp study every 5 to 7 years. So we'd like to see some action on Suffolk's part to maintain the plan over time and make sure that the recommendations and progress we make with this study doesn't expire down the line. 5 to 7 years is typically when we see dramatic change in comparison to the market. So this recommendation simply says whether you do it with existing staff resources or go out and use someone like Evergreen to conduct a class and comp study every 5 to 7 years, with 5 being ideal, obviously. Okay, recommendation 8. This is to conduct an in-depth analysis of the correlation between years of experience and placement or penetration into the salary schedule. So this basically is asking Suffolk Public Schools down the line, once market equity has been addressed, to look at how years of experience for any given employer relates to their placement within the range. We sometimes find that through freezes that gets off. I think there's been a couple freezes here, and what that does is it leaves employees at, let's say, a step 8 who really have 11 years of experience. And with the idea to correlate steps to years of experience, that's not a good thing. So we're advising here that once market parity has been addressed, the division go back, look very closely at the experience of all employees, and look at where they fall within the step plan. In recommendation 9, these were the jobs that were broken out from recommendation 6, the director and coordinator positions. And these were the director and coordinator positions found to be 10 to 20% or more below market, as well as the director of secondary leadership. And so this cost was just split out from recommendation 6, $64,211. And that concludes the recommendations that we made in our final report. We also came up with an alternative implementation approach. So again, going back to an earlier slide where we recommended that all recommendations be adopted at once, because that's the plan that would bring Suffolk Public Schools up to market right now. We know that it's not always feasible. We know that divisions have compensation philosophies and priorities. And so just based on what we know about the division and where we see the division headed, we make this phased-in recommendation. So recommendations 1 through 5 would be in phase 1. So that's your support personnel who were found to be 10 or 20% or more below market. That's your teacher scale adjustment, and that's that recommendation for the technology technician hierarchy or breakout. Recommendation 6 would be phase 2, and that's addressing the support employees that were found to be between 10 and 20% below market, so moderately behind market. Phase 3, recommendations 7 and 8, which was to look at do a comprehensive study every 5 to 7 years, as well as to look at the correlation between years of experience and placement within the range. And finally, recommendation 9 is phase 4, and that was addressing the director and coordinator level jobs, as well as the director of secondary leadership, that were 10 to 20% below market. So the conclusion from all our recommendations, total implementation cost was calculated at $4.7 million. Again, this was just about $5,000 off from what we had in our draft report. Overall, we recognize through our data analysis that Suffolk Public Schools is behind market in different areas. Teacher scale, you've got some support positions, you've got some director and coordinator level positions. And the recommendations that we have made are strictly to bring Suffolk Public Schools to market. And then finally, implementation of the new structure will improve the internal equity. It will compensate employees taking into consideration both internal and external equity, so the market and complexity of duties and tasks in their current job. It will allow for flexibility in its administration. We've offered the phased-in approach, and it will provide ample room for salary growth within the ranges. And so we've gotten to this point of the final report. We're very happy to be here. There's still a couple housekeeping steps that we work with the division on once we know what the plan of action is based on these recommendations. The first piece we're actually working on now is to provide the revised job descriptions. So we're going back and based on what every single employee told us in their job assessment tool, we're making revisions to the classification descriptions, and that includes the Fair Labor Standards Act determination, whether the the classification be exempt or non-exempt. We will develop the solution database. So we derived our costs by taking the employee database and actually running the numbers and projecting out what all these recommendations would cost. Once we know what direction Suffolk Public Schools will go with our recommendation, we'll actually go and clean that back up and deliver to you all a database of employees with the correct, accurate information based on what's going to happen. That's loaded into the HR system sometimes or just used on the side. And then finally, we'll develop the compensation and classification plan for 2015-16 once we know what's going to happen with these recommendations. So currently, there's one out there for 2014-15. We'll simply update that with any new schedules, class titles, et cetera, that result from our study. So those are kind of the three big pieces that we still have outlined. That compensation and classification plan for 2015-16 will also address how we feel or what approach we feel the division should take to placing employees into the schedule once we know, again, which direction Suffolk Public Schools is headed with these recs. Okay, thank you very much. Any questions?
Board members. I have one. Now, you're saying that we won't be able to do any more digging until we get a final resolution on where we're going to go with our salaries. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Now, in your estimation, where would this put us in the scheme of things with the different divisions you checked out? Where would this, if we accepted and this was implemented as you have stated, where would that put us in the scheme of things with the divisions? In the middle somewhere?
Sure, it would put you right at market midpoint, right at competition where you'd want to be. So not leading the market, not behind the market, right at market.
Questions?
Question about the insurance. You know, over the years, we've had to increase employees' contributions, state contributions to retirement and some of the other things. Did we include that or did we talk about that as we were going through this?
When including the insurance piece was not a part of the RFP.
No,
Okay.
not the cost of our insurance, but the state is raising some of the things that we are responsible for, not insurance, retirement.
Okay, retirement. Did we take that in
The
consideration?
contribution, yes.
We did not, or I guess in a sense we did, because every other locality would have to donate the exact amount as
Right,
well, the
right.
percentage, so.
When you referring to the markets, what divisions are you comparing?
Sure, and I can reference that in the report. Here. So on page 4-1 of the report, which is the chapter on the market survey results, at the bottom, the peers selected for participation are listed, and those would include Chesapeake Public Schools, Children's Hospital of the Kings and Daughters. I believe that was included for a comparison with nurses. City of Chesapeake, Hampton City Schools, Isle of Wight County Schools, Isle of Wight County. So we've got the city of Franklin, Newport News, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Richmond, Suffolk, Virginia Beach, Franklin City Public Schools, and then the following remaining public school systems: Newport News, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Richmond, Southampton, Virginia Beach, and then also we included the Virginia Department of Education as a peer.
Chesapeake as well, didn't you? You said Chesapeake as well, did you not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's
Okay.
pretty
All right,
extensive. That's what we
thank
should-
you, that's pretty extensive.
That's where we
So you
should.
went west as well as east then?
Yes, sir. Yeah. We, when we select peers, we look within at least a 50-mile radius, if not more. The Department of Labor says that's about as far as an employee will drive for employment. So we will look beyond that, but that's kind of our radius that we stick to.
Certainly is a comprehensive study. We appreciate all your hard work, and we plan on utilizing this till its fullest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Anybody?
I just want to ask him one thing. If we do the phase-in program, that last phase, I know you can't tell me exactly what it might be, but what are we looking at, or what do you think we're looking at with regard to the last folks we phase in if we use a phased-in approach?
As far as timing,
Yes, as far as timing, but as far as raising what we'll need. I can share with you, my concern is that if we do a phased-in approach and we don't ask for the money we need now, next year we'll be in the same holding position, wondering what to ask for to make up what we need. And the year after that, we'll get more and more and more and more. So I'm just asking.
Sure, and that happens a lot, and that's specifically why we include that kind of probing the market in our recommendation, because our contract doesn't carry through for 3 years from now, so we want to make sure we've recommended something that puts you all in the right place and having the right data to, if phase 4 equals year 4,
Right.
and we made the recommendations for some of those classifications, going to the market and saying, hey, over the last 3 years since the study was done, we've seen the market increase or adjust their pay scales by about 8%, let's say. Then you would want to definitely take that into consideration on top of our recommendations. So,
If I may, oftentimes when you do an audit or an evaluation of some sort like this externally, you have the management responses, and at this time I'd like to share those responses regarding the recommendations, and I think Mr. Littlefield is going to get us to the PowerPoint, and Ms. Forsman is going to progress it for me. But as you turn to page 10 in your notebook, and while I know we have much discussion when we talk about the proposed financial plan, I did want to go through each of the recommendations and talk about where we are and what my response is, or our response is, in reference to the recommendations. As you see, recommendation number 1 that talks about the 10 classifications found to be 20% or more below market midpoint, costing $59,000 roughly. That recommendation is actually going to be included in the superintendent's proposed 2015-16 financial plan. Recommendation 2 is also included in the proposed financial plan, which is to reclassify the 10 support positions to better reflect roles and responsibilities. That's all. Both of those obviously are part of phase 1. Recommendation 3 is also included in the superintendent's financial plan. This is to address the inconsistencies in the step progression found throughout our teacher scale, adjusting that teacher scale. And recommendation 4 is also a part of phase 1. In reference to this particular recommendation, it's no cost, but my response is a committee will be formed to review the salary scales using data from the Virginia Education Association Annual Report of Teacher Salaries and Surveys of Region 2 school divisions. Each year, the Virginia Education Association forwards us a survey that'll give us specific data to look at this on a regular basis as recommended in recommendation 4. Recommendation number 5 obviously is dependent upon the school board's direction to management. So as you direct me as far as looking at that information, as far as recommendation 5, conduct an in-depth review of the school superintendent's contracts and compensation to determine compensation is appropriate.
Before you go on, can we make it, I want to reiterate one thing. Did the gentleman not say that our superintendent here was 40% lower than 20?
20%.
20%
I'm
below
sorry.
market.
Didn't want to get 20% more. Okay, thank you.
Recommendation number 6, which is regrade the 31 classifications. My recommendation is to have that included in the financial plan for 2016, 2017, dependent upon funding, of course. Recommendation 7, conduct a comprehensive classification and compensation study every 5 years. This is dependent upon funding. As we know, that does cost. But collecting the data that we have on a regular basis, we may not need to do as comprehensive of a study every 5 years as listed there. Recommendation 8, conduct an in-depth analysis of correlation between years of experience. I think a committee can be formed to look at that as well, to review the correlation using internal data and make recommendations to the superintendent annually, which we will bring to the board as well. And then finally, recommendation 9, regrade the 6 coordinator and director classification positions costing $64,000. And as was indicated, we know that costs may be different as far as 2017 and 2018, but that would be my response as far as dealing with that recommendation. Questions in reference to my responses to that?
Whitney,
Yes, ma'am.
regarding recommendation 8, could you give me an example of how that would work? Because I don't get it. I mean, if a teacher is on, say, step 4, which would represent X years of experience, then when we adjusted that, we would put that teacher on the step that represented their actual years of experience, right?
Yes.
So how does that not just take care of itself? I don't
It does for
understand that.
teachers for the most part.
Okay.
But what it doesn't take care of all the other employees that we get when we hire, if they're coming from outside of the division as well.
Okay, so if they come from outside, then if they have X number of years' experience, wouldn't you just automatically put them on the step that would represent that?
Currently, your policy indicates that we give no more than 7 years of experience of like position. I think this particular recommendation would allow us to look at that and to see if that's what we want to do or if we want to make some modifications.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
Wasn't it also, you explained to us that a teacher that was promoted within, this would affect them and how they were placed because current policy holds them to a 10% raise?
Yes, you're exactly right. Currently, our policy states that if there's an internal promotion, no more than 10% as far as salary increase. Yet, someone who comes from the outside, again, we look at years of experience, and so what we find ourselves in some instances doing, someone from the outside could be placed higher on a scale for the same position in comparison to someone internally.
Superintendent,
Yes.
say that, well, recommendation 5, when we look back at your recommendations from phase 1 through, for our phase 1 implementation, there's no dollar on it. So what we, as a board, we need to adjust that?
Well, when we look at that particular recommendation, it talks about conducting the in-depth review. So that would be the first step. That's no cost associated with that. That's the recommendation to do the research and the collection of data. That's the only recommendation for that one at this particular time, for this particular Phase 1 piece.
Get that, Ms. Skeeter? I wasn't sure whether I
Probably
did
gonna have to
exactly.
Well,
catch it later.
I don't mind going back to it. It says conduct an in-depth review of the school superintendent's contract and compensation to determine if compensation is appropriate. That's the recommendation, to do that analysis. Evergreen didn't do that. They looked at base salaries. They're suggesting that we look at like contracts. Remember, the contracts for every superintendent is public information. So looking at those same school divisions that were used in this particular document, we could look at each of those contracts, and then from there, if we see a discrepancy and we see that it remains that 20% below market value, then you all would have to make a decision how to
There are
be
other
addressed.
variables to consider there.
I was going to say, does that, do those contracts, which are public, as you said, do they include all benefits and I want to say perks or whatever? Do they include everything? Is that all public? Or
My
just
understanding, yes.
Just the,
The contract is conclusive of the benefits, and entire benefits, to my
okay.
knowledge, yes.
Any other questions? Nope. Thank you. We'll adjourn to executive session. Can we have a reading to go into executive session, please?
A motion is needed to go into a closed meeting to discuss the following items and subjects pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended. The discussion and/or consideration of the personnel report and related information. The discussion and/or consideration of the pupil personnel report and related information. And the discussion and/or consideration of student appeal numbers 1415-7 and 1415-8, all of which is authorized by Section 2.2-3711, 1 and 2 of the Code of Virginia 1950 as amended.
So move.
Second.
Board Member Bouchard,
yes.
Board Member Brooks Buck,
Yes.
Board Member Byram,
Yes.
Board Member Mitnick,
Yes.
Board Member Skeeter,
Yes.
Vice Chairman Copeland,
Aye.
Chairman Dobransky,
Yes,
motion carried.
thank you. We'll adjourn to executive session at this time. Say hello.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Bennett and Councilmember Fawcett, for coming.